Hello and welcome to the third session of the Aspen Global Congress on Scientific Thinking and Action, which is a gathering of about 100 science communicators and advocates from over 50 countries. Because we're meeting in a digital format, we've been able to open up the panel discussions to public audience, and we have people joining us from around the world. Thank you so much. I'm joined here with my co-chair, Natália Pasternak.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for another session. And as Ernst said, we took advantage of it being digital so that we can cater to a larger public, at least in the main sessions. So welcome to our participants as well, who are staying with us for longer discussions. And we hope we can really create a global community of scientific advocates and communicators.
Today's session is on the risks and dangers of alternative medicine, and it's being chaired by Roxana Tabakman. She is a biologist and science journalist and writer from Argentina, and she has worked for the last 30 years in science popularization and journalism in Spain, Argentina, and Brazil. I'll turn it over to her now. Thank you, Roxana.
Hello. Welcome to session 3, Risk and Danger of Alternative Medicines. I will be the chair of the session. Thank you very much for the introduction. I want to begin saying that the use of alternative medicines is quite spread in Latin America. Alternative, complementary, natural, traditional practices are rooted in the tradition of healthcare. And for these reasons, also with unproven medicines, they are included in formal health systems together. So there is a big problem in my region. One of the reasons perhaps is medical populism. Unproven medicines are accepted not only at state level in many countries, but by medical associations and even in the academic world. So the point of view of the social scientists that push to adopt sociological, anthropological, historical perspective is probably just another factor. The result is that in Latin America, healthcare is not as scientific minded as it should be. And we, science journalists, we have a very big problem there because when we question data, when we ask for results, we feel quite alone and we are not really criticized for following just an evidence-based perspective. So as a Latin American science journalist, I feel privileged for the opportunity to listen to such important speakers today. I know this panel will be unique. We'll learn a lot, I hope. And I hope we'll learn how to face this worrisome situation and to limit the damage. In a more personal approach, I would like to know if you, in face-to-face situation, did convert anyone, because it's a very difficult task. So, but I'm here just to keep our fantastic speakers on time and moderate the room. I will explain very quickly. We have 40-45 minutes. We'll do rotated pair conversations, meaning that each speaker will be interviewed by another. And then we will rotate the pairs till everyone will be interviewed. We'll not have a Q&A time now, but please keep your questions, keep your comments, because later in the second part of the session, the breakout rooms, we want everyone to participate and to share the thoughts. Now I have the honor to introduce the first panelist, Mr. Narendra Nayaka. Mr. Narendra Nayaka is the president of the Federation of Indian Rationalist Associations. He's a retired teacher of biochemistry at Manipal University, and he quit in 2006 to devote all his time for the movement of making people think rationally. And to do that, he even used magic tricks to expose those who try to fool us. Curiously, there is an article in the Indian Constitution that states that it's the duty of every citizen to develop a way of life which uses scientific method, what is called scientific temper. I particularly would like to know what it means now, scientific temper in pandemic times. But Professor Edzard Ernst, Emeritus Professor of the University of Exeter in the UK, will interview Mr. Narendra Nayaka. Professor Ernst, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Narendra.
Hi.
You're the only one in this group who I haven't personally met, and I have lost you now, but we probably can still hear you. Anyway, what fascinates me is that you're from India, and I have been watching a lot of Indian stuff recently in view of alternative medicine. And my first question is, why is alternative medicine, particularly homeopathy, so popular in India?
Yes, it's because of the inadequacy of the medical facilities, the low income of the people, and their belief in superstition. People, rather than think rationally, would like to go by some sort of a promise made by some sort of a person who claims to have some power. So that's why they tend to follow these so-called practitioners of alternative medicine. It could be anything from a concoction to a amulet or a blessing or something like that. And many times these people do succeed because a lot of things are self-limiting, viral, psychosomatic. And in those conditions, they do succeed. And so they'll say that it's because of the power of the so-called practitioner of the alternative medicine. Again, if you come to India, we have got recognized alternative medicine and we have got the unrecognized one. Actually, these things should not be recognized, but they are, because the Supreme Court of India said because lots of people believe in them. So rather than systems of science, there are systems of belief. Homeopathy is one. Of course, the sugar pill dispensers would like to claim that it's an indigenous system of medicine. And our people do get surprised when I tell them, oh, it's not from India, it's from Germany. So, oh, is it? So that's the sad state of it. There is something called as Ayush, the acronym AYUSH. A for Ayurveda, U for Yoga and Naturopathy, and Y for Yoga and Naturopathy, U for Jnani, S for Siddha, and H for Homeopathy. These are the 5 systems which have got the recognition from the government of India. And hence people think that they do work. So
Ayush
it's
is
our job to demystify.
the Ayush ministry is interesting because it implies, and it's also often expressed, that homeopathy is a traditional Indian medicine, which is clearly not true. It comes from Germany, like myself. So why do they claim it's Indian?
Anything that works, they want to claim as Indian. That's all. Because they'll say everything was there in our ancient texts and somebody stole it from there. So aeroplanes were there, the internet was there, atom bombs were there, and everything was there. So this also was there. And nobody will question them. As simple as that. See, the Health Minister of India now is a qualified practitioner of the evidence-based system of medicine. And he goes and releases a concoction which is supposed to cure as well as prevent COVID-19. What do you say for that? And he is the chairman of the WHO, some committee also. So we are a nation of contradictions.
I've also heard a claim that the relatively low death rate during the pandemic is due to the fact that Indians got homeopathic remedies as a preventative. Is that true?
In one state, which is to the south of where I am, they distributed these homeopathic sugar pills as a prophylactic. Of course, I don't know whether they work. But the low testing rate is because of a lack of availability of the test, not because of. Because I had COVID in March and I was not even eligible to be tested because the testing criteria was pretty high. Only later on, by the antibody test, I came to know that I was infected. And again, people would like to play down on the number of infections. So the low testing rate will help in that. But I see some states in the country who have got nearly 30% testing rate. For example, in Delhi, it's 30%. So it's not that bad.
What if you had one single measure to implement in India to make more sense about healthcare and alternative healthcare, what would you suggest?
Ban them.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
That's all I would suggest. I would ask them to be banned, I said, banned. That
Ban it.
should not be there. Ban it.
Okay, ban it.
Because the things that happen in the name of alternative medicine, I've got horror stories, including my own friends and relatives.
Yeah.
That's the sad state of affairs.
When we in Europe ever mention the word banning, it's obviously not very popular, and people say it's the wrong approach because we would drive it underground, and then it would become more dangerous because then it would escape any sort of regulation, and if it's unregulated, it's even more dangerous than it is already.
But in India, whether regulated or unregulated, because the system is so porous that things will pass whether you try to regulate it or not. But banning may give a message to people. People may ask questions. If this was working, why is it banned? So some little bit of relief maybe. That's what I think. Because there's no other way out. People give you mercury, they give you lead. Because I was working for lead poisoning. We had a lead poisoning referral center. And I've seen quite a few cases of lead poisoning.
Yeah, that is with Ayurvedic medicine mainly.
Yes, most likely, because homeopathy is just sugar.
Homeopathy is just nothing, and therefore it does nothing, and it is dangerous because it does nothing.
Nothing, yes.
Yeah.
It gives you a false sense of.
Very good. Yes. Thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. It's just 1 minute. Okay, perhaps the last question.
Yeah, last question.
Okay.
What got you interested in alternative medicine?
Because I see that happening. I started as a consumer activist, and when I saw all these things happening, I took an interest in that. And also, I'm working for the anti-superstition. And the biggest superstitions are the so-called alternative, because they're the most dangerous.
Okay.
So that's what made
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now it's time to turn the floor with Mr. Nayak. We'll interview Dr. Pasternak. Natália, your camera, please. Your camera is off. Okay. Dr. Natália Pasternak from Brazil is founder and president of the Instituto Questão de Ciência, Question of Science Institute, the first Brazilian institute for the promotion of skepticism, critical and rational thinking. A microbiologist that was a dancer before becoming a scientist, now since the pandemic began, she became the most recognized name in the country defending what can sound obvious, a scientific approach for public health decision-making. She's famous now in Brazil, but for her, the greatest recognition is to be the first Brazilian named fellow of the Skeptical Committee of Inquiry. Mr. Nayak, you can, Dr. Pasternak, your mics should be on.
Yes. Hi, Natália. We sent you hydroxychloroquine. How do you like that? Did you eat any of it?
Well, hydroxychloroquine was a big issue here in Brazil, Narendra, as I'm sure you know, and it still is.
Yeah.
And it goes to show that Brazil is very prone to believing in pseudoscience, and even the doctors here are still prescribe hydroxychloroquine, even though the rest of the world has already understood that it doesn't work for COVID-19, it works for malaria. Brazil's doctors are still prescribing and still discussing it as if there were no scientific evidence whatsoever proving that it doesn't work. So it's a huge problem here in Brazil, and it's not only hydroxychloroquine, it's all kinds of pseudoscientific cures. So we have hydroxychloroquine, we have ivermectin, which is a deworming medication, nitazoxanide, which is another deworming medication. So you see that Brazilians are huge in deworming medication, using it as an antiviral. And people really believe that stuff, and they take these drugs, and it makes them feel protected. So they feel that they don't have to quarantine, they don't have to go into lockdown because they are taking the miracle cures, which will protect them from COVID-19. And it led us to the sad situation where my country is right now becoming a global hazard.
Right. We had a picture of the monkey god carrying a mountain when hydroxychloroquine was exported first to Brazil. Now, when the AstraZeneca vaccine is exported from India, again they have the same picture. And your president says, thank India very much for that. Anyway, now coming back to this COVID time, what is the general attitude of the people there towards vaccination? Are they welcoming it?
Yeah, in general, Narendra, people in Brazil are very favorable to vaccination. It's a country where vaccination has a very strong tradition in our in our healthcare system. We have a public healthcare system that is free and caters to 200 million people. So we are very proud of our healthcare system here in Brazil, and we are very proud of our vaccination program, because our national immunization program is one of the best in the world, and we really get vaccines to every Brazilian, to 200 million Brazilians every year. So we are very experienced in organizing vaccination campaigns, and it was really a surprise to us that we weren't the first Latin American country to vaccinate the population, because we were expecting that we would get vaccines and we know what to do. If we got vaccines, we would know what to do. But as to the population, they are really favorable. They want the vaccines. We don't have a very strong influence here in Brazil of the anti-vax movement. It's very weak, very minor. Not that it should be disregarded, of course. We should pay attention and not let it grow, but it's still very minor. Most of our population, according to the latest public polls, wants to get a COVID-19 shot. About 92% of the population is eager to get a COVID-19 shot. So we don't get a lot of vaccine hesitancy here in Brazil.
Right. Do you have any concoctions to prevent, cure, or for post-recovery phase of COVID?
Oh, yes.
In the market?
we have these drugs that are meant for other diseases, as I said, deworming medications and the famous hydroxychloroquine. They're still big in Brazil, and they are promoted by the federal government. They are promoted by the Ministry of Health itself. So if you go to our Ministry of Health webpage, their website, you can see there that they promote these drugs that are meant for other diseases. They are not meant for COVID-19, but there's a huge hype here in Brazil in the media, not really in the regular media, but in social media. Regular media, by the way, is doing a great job, but in social media, you can find all kinds of claims that these drugs work for COVID-19 and that the scientists don't want you to know that, and the drug companies don't want you to know that because they want everybody to be ill. And it's the same kind of storytelling that we hear all the time for alternative medicine. So, and of course, then we got alternative medicine as well. So we got a lot of homeopathy for COVID-19, ozone therapy. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It's ozone rectal.
I have.
Oh yeah, so you know it. Yeah, that's popular here in southern Brazil. So there are lots of cities who are pushing to get ozone therapy as a regular COVID treatment or as a treatment as an alternative medicine or anyway. What else? I think these are the most popular ones here in Brazil. The drugs, the anti-malaria and deworming medication, homeopathy, and ozone rectal therapy.
You are speaking about bad science. We have a lot of pseudoscience as well as non-science. We have a whole lot of concoctions with the prefix cor, corwin, coronil, coro this, coro that, and people are buying them up, thinking that it's going to be a preventive and all that. In fact, I have got 4 such products de-advertised because they put something called coro. Do you have anything like that in Brazil? Some products starting with coro.
Well, I think the homeopathic remedies, they start with corona this or corona that, and then people just think that it's appropriate. But the other ones, they have nothing to do with coronavirus in their names, and that's what makes it really weird. And what makes it even more weird, Narendra, is that for instance, for the deworming medication that the government is pushing, there was a big grant for a scientific study on that deworming medication. So you see that pseudoscience here in Brazil, it sometimes comes from inside the academia, from inside the university and research institutes. So they got a huge grant from the government to study this deworming medication, and they published in a lesser journal, of course, but they published, and in their publication, a scientific publication, they called the deworming medication an antiviral. So they changed it. Sometimes, so it became, even though it doesn't work, and even though they showed it doesn't work in the paper, but they still call it an antiviral.
Yes. And sad to say, my last statement, that we lost a student who just joined for MD in medicine the day after he joined, because he was given a large dose of HCQ by his own professor of medicine. So it happens everywhere. And the boy died right in the ward, where he had just joined as a postgraduate.
Thank you very much for your participation. It was quite worrisome what we have heard. But now it's time that Natália will interview Dr. Joe Schwarcz from Canada. Dr. Schwarcz, you can switch your camera on. He's a chemist and has hosted a radio show on science for 40 years, has appeared hundreds of times on TV, writes a regular newspaper column, and is the author of 18 bestsellers. He has been awarded several honorary degrees and is the recipient of numerous awards for teaching chemistry, but also for interpreting science for the public. Professor Schwarcz is also an amateur magician, and he often spices up his presentation with a little magic, and is a big fan of Sherlock Holmes. But as director of the Office of Science and Society of McGill University, he has the mission of separating sense from nonsense. So today, he will have the opportunity to inspire us with his experience in being the head of a department focused exclusively in the interaction of science and society. Let's hear the interview.
Joe, I can't see you.
I have everything.
Oh, yes, you're here. Yeah, and now I saw it. Hey, well, Joe, I'm really glad to have the chance to interview you because I do have lots of questions. But I would like to start with you being the head of a science and society department in a university, and your goal is to separate science from nonsense. I wish we had such a department here in São Paulo, and I think every university should have such a department because it's not about just communicating science of what the university does, but it's about really separating science from nonsense. So explaining to the people what science is really about. Can you tell us a little bit about how this department came to be in McGill? What real did you see any needs in the society for a specific department to separate science from nonsense? How long have you been doing this job? And how does it feel to run a department from inside the academia? Because I said in Brazil, for instance, sometimes we teach homeopathy in our medical schools. And I believe that in McGill you don't, but if you did, you would be, this would be something to tackle within your department. So how does it work?
Well, it actually has a long history. All started really about 40 years ago. That's when I started at McGill. And I always had the idea of making sure that every lecture in chemistry, which is my field, somehow related to everyday life. And I didn't talk about, valency or quantum mechanical tunneling without talking about how this could eventually be beneficial. And eventually I started to get asked to speak to public groups, and I got on the radio, and then it kind of snowballed from there. And I started to write columns, and the columns coalesced into a book. And used to get numerous emails asking about all kinds of scientific issues. And then because, I had kind of become popular, a university decided that it was time to kind of formalize it. And luckily, we got a very large financial grant from a philanthropist. And so we had some money to start this. And I think we are quite unique. The only, as far as I know, the only university-based such operation. And it has been a fascinating roller coaster ride because we deal with all kinds of things. Certainly not only with alternative medicine, but the area of cosmetics, food additives, various kind of quackeries. And there's never a boring day because I never know when the phone rings what the question is going to be, whether or not it's about kissing golf balls, which originally a guy called me up and he worried about this because golfers have the habit of picking up their golf ball and kissing it before whacking it for superstitious reasons. He was worried that the ball may be contaminated with pesticides because he had heard about pesticides used on golf courses. So you never know. I have questions about how do you open a cremation urn because someone wanted to spread the ashes out over the water, but the urn had been sealed. So we had to, find some sort of solvent that would release the glue. And then, of course, there are all the questions about healing and the alternative stuff. And I originally, believe it or not, got interested in that because I'm a collector of all kinds of things. And I started to collect various kinds of medical devices which were supposed to help cure disease. For example, this one here. This is a wand that not only diagnoses disease, but once you've diagnosed it, it will actually cure the disease. And if it doesn't work, well, then you can resort to a variety of pendulums. And again, these all claim to do the same thing, even though they look quite different. And it goes on and on. For example, this little rod here has some magnesium embedded in it, and you put it in water, and that is supposed to generate hydrogen. And it does generate a small amount of hydrogen. And hydrogen is, of course, talked about as an antioxidant, and therefore it will take care of all the free radicals in your body and prevent aging, cure disease. So I get into all these kind of things. And, you know, if the crystal pendulum isn't good enough, well, then you can reach for a crystal water cylinder. You fill this with water, and there's a crystal in it, which will energize the water. And you drink that water, and of course, you feel a lot better. If that doesn't do it for you, you can go for the alpha spin, enough to spin your head. And what you're supposed to do is hold it over your head. And it has colors in it, as you can see. These are radiesthetic colors that will cure anything that ails you. If that doesn't work, then there is this disc, and it will reflect light, and you have to make sure it reflects it right into your eye, because that is curative. And if all of that fails, well, then you can reach for this device. It's very interesting. It has this little head on it. As you can see, it looks like a little person. And what you do is you massage your belly button with it. Now, the reason that I find all of this interesting is because the claims that are made on behalf of all of these items are the same. They are the same. They either detoxify, they cure, they eliminate parasites, and it doesn't matter what the device is. It doesn't matter if it's the belly button massager or if it is this rather interesting massager. I'm not exactly clear what part of the anatomy you're supposed to use this on. But in any case, they all supposedly do the same thing. So that is, you know, originally what got me thinking about is how can you have all of these claims for all of these different devices that are supposed to work in a different way? And of course, the answer here is the mind, because there's such a strong relationship between the body and the mind. And if you think that something is going to work for you, it very often can. And this, of course, is what we call the placebo effect, which kicks in 30 to 40% of the time. And sometimes that can be very useful. The problem is distracting from conventional therapy, which may actually work. So if someone is going to use a belly button massager and forego chemotherapy, then we have a very serious situation. If someone is going to use that because they have some arthritic pain and it makes them feel better, that's a totally different story. So this is, you know, how it all started. And I never know what the next email is going to ask. I never know what the next phone call is going to bring. So it's really been an exciting up and down adventure.
Joe, do you see a standard in the questions you get in your radio show, for instance? Do you see a standard of how people relate to quackery? And I see all the ducks behind you, and I know that you have plenty, you have a collection of ducks there. So you have a lot of experience with all kinds of quackery. As you said, it's not just alternative medicine. And do you see a pattern in the people that come to you with questions? Is it the same kind of fallacies that move them, that drive these kind of questions? For instance, believing that all natural is better, or is it the same kind of reasoning?
Yes, it's interesting you bring that one up, because I would say that in my 40 years of activity in this business, that's the single biggest myth that I have to fight. That somehow natural is safe and benign, and something that is synthetic is automatically dangerous. And we, of course, know that this is not the case. The only way you can tell if any substance is beneficial or detrimental is by studying it, not by looking at its ancestry. Whether it was made by Mother Nature in a bush or by a chemist in a lab is totally irrelevant. What matters is what it is. So that is the basic message that I try to get out there. And of course, evidence-based. That's our mantra. Whenever someone comes up with a question, you try to guide them to say, well, where did you hear this? Who told you this? What is the evidence? Does it eventually get back to the peer-reviewed literature? And by asking these kind of questions, I think it becomes possible to kind of set them on the right track without being dogmatic, without just lecturing to them, because my experience has been that the method that works best is to give people the rope to hang themselves if they need to be hanged, if you know what I mean. Let them discover the truth for themselves. And I find that works very well. And if you just start asking the right questions, they will then start to think, gee, you know, well, where did I really hear this? And what's the background to that story? Can it really be traced back to the peer-reviewed literature? So I think we have some success in that area, but I cannot claim total success because, of course, quackery will never be wiped out. It has always been with us and always will be, because it's very seductive. Generally, the idea that there are simple solutions to complex problems is what people look for. And let's face it, chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery are not attractive propositions. Homeopathy or color therapy or herbal supplements are much more inviting. And that seduction will always be there. But I think that we can make some inroads. We cannot win the war, but I think we can win the odd battle.
Thank you very much.
Joe.
Thank you very much, Natália. Thank you very much, Dr. Joe. It was very, very interesting, but it's now time for you, Dr. Joe, to interview Professor Edzard Ernst. Professor Edzard Ernst went to the University of Exeter in 1993 to establish the world's first chair in complementary medicine. Her first job as a junior doctor was in an homeopathic hospital, and later has conducted research into what he defines the so-called alternative medicine, SCAM, for 25 years. He has published more than 1,000 papers in the peer-reviewed medical literature, more than 50 books, translated into over a dozen languages, more than 100 book chapters, and he's in fact published more on the subject than anyone else on the planet. And he's also an enthusiastic blogger. Professor Ernst also acts as an expert witness in numerous court cases in the UK, US, and Canada, and he told me that he has very powerful enemies. So let's turn our attention to the last interview. Please, Dr. Schwarcz, you can interview Professor Ernst.
Well, when you play word association games and you say alternative medicine, the name that comes up is Professor Ernst. He's known around the world, of course, for this. So I want to start out by asking you about the word itself, alternative medicine, which is somewhat of a problem for me. I mean, we in the trade kind of like to say, well, there's two kinds of medicine. It either works or it doesn't. If it works, it's not alternative. If it doesn't work, it isn't medicine. So why do we keep using this term alternative medicine?
Yeah, that's a good question. Hi, Joe, by the way. Good to see you again. There are dozens of terms, and I've come to the conclusion that one is as bad as the next one. It's much better to abandon umbrella terms like that and talk about the actual modality. If we're talking about acupuncture, let's talk about acupuncture. If we talk homeopathy, let's talk about homeopathy. In recent months, I have adopted the term so-called alternative medicine because that shortens very nicely to scam, and that in itself has a meaning. But you're quite right. The umbrella terms are pretty useless. Why do we still use alternative medicine so often? I think it's because that's the term people know. If you go and speak to the odd man in the street, and you talk about integrated medicine or integrative medicine or complementary medicine, they may not know what you're talking about. So alternative medicine, if you're addressing the public, is still quite useful.
The term integrative medicine is becoming very popular, and hospitals and universities are starting up integrated medicine departments. Very often what is being integrated is nonsense into real medicine. What do you make of all of these efforts by reputable institutions to get into this so-called integrated medicine? I mean, let's face it, real medicine is integrated medicine. You integrate whatever works. So what are they really talking about in these departments of integrative medicine?
Exactly. It is puzzling why, particularly in America, far less in Europe, but in North America, this seems to be a plague almost. There are several reasons. I think the most important one is money, because universities are run like BMW factories these days, only less efficiently, and they go where the money is. There are many very wealthy philanthropists who are ready to give millions. I think the last donation in North America was 200 million for an outfit, for an academic outfit. My own department, way back in 1993, was also based on a philanthropic donation, but that was precisely 1 million, and we had to cope with that for 20 years. So that wasn't very easy. But I think money is the key. Political correctness is another key. Nobody wants to be a dinosaur and reject what seems to be fashionable. So universities jump on that bandwagon, and the press, of course, the press writes so much positive nonsense about it that this generates a momentum where there is a bandwagon to jump onto.
I often say that education is not a vaccine against belief in nonsense. And there are many MDs and PhDs who have gone over to the dark side. How do we explain that? How do we explain legitimate doctors who do promote homeopathy and various other very questionable therapies?
That is a very good question, which puzzles me a lot. Coming from Germany and growing up in Germany, having studied and worked in Germany, this is particularly poignant because so many German doctors use homeopathy, for instance. One reason that I often think of is that medical school teaches you a lot of things, but it doesn't teach you critical thinking, not at all. Whenever I had the occasion as a professor of medicine, I introduced courses in critical thinking, but as soon as I left that university, they closed down again. And it's not that medical students are particularly uninterested in critical thinking. It is, I think, for the reason that there is so much to do for medical students. You're just struggling to survive with the information that you have to cope with, and you are being turned into a learning machine and not into a thinking machine.
There are, of course, numerous so-called scam, as you call it, therapies out there. Some of them, of course, are benign. I mean, I think the belly button massager that I showed before, I don't think is widely used as kind of laughable thing. But what do you think are the most egregious, the most dangerous forms of the quote alternative treatments?
That's interesting. I've just published a book in German for a publisher who was quite openly pro-alternative medicine. So they convinced me to publish a book on the 20 best and the 20 worst alternative therapies. And amongst the worst, I was discussing homeopathy, for instance, and that puzzles a lot of people. How can homeopathy, which doesn't contain anything, be the worst, one of the most dangerous alternative treatments? I think it's precisely because it doesn't do anything, and homeopaths claim that it cures cancer, it cures all sorts of very vicious diseases, including corona infections, etc., etc. And if a large section of the population uses a complete placebo to cure dangerous diseases, then surely homeopathy must be one of the worst. But your question probably was aimed at what I call the direct adverse effects of alternative medicine. And there a treatment springs to mind, chiropractic, because in my view, there's no other alternative treatment which is so directly dangerous as chiropractic. There are many cases where upper spinal manipulation by a chiropractor has caused a stroke, and people have died because of this. Chiropractors are in fierce denial about it. They have tried to sue me, they have tried to shut me up in all sorts of other ways, but I'm very keen to inform the public that they should think twice about visiting a chiropractor.
No, of course, we don't know exactly where COVID came from, but there is evidence that it crossed over from some animal, probably in one of the wet markets in China. And in China, there are, of course, a lot of superstitious beliefs in various animal parts being curative. I mean, they use a gallbladder of bears, etc., parts of the pangolin. Do you think that there's a connection here, that the belief that these strange animal parts, and which can be purchased in these wet markets in China, that those played a role in the virus crossing over to humans?
Yeah, there's one theory. I'm not sure how valid that theory is, that this played a major role, but certainly the animal parts and their usage in TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, is abhorrent, because not only are they not working, not only is it pretty disgusting to use animals' parts as medicine, but also they're endangering species, and surely that must be a great risk, not just to patients, but also to the survival of certain species.
You've kind of been a lightning rod for the quacks to attack, right? Have you ever had a real fear of harm?
It will be the last answer. We are on time already.
Yeah. I had the police around in my department because we had reason to believe that we were about to receive a letter bomb. But the biggest fear is not that letter bomb. The biggest fear during my working period was Prince Charles, who actually managed to close down my department. And that is a fear not personally for me, but for the 20 people who were working in my department. And that's a pretty miserable story.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ernst, Dr. Joe, Natália, Narendra. It was a very, very stimulated session. I think everyone will keep with a lot of questions for later and a lot of new thoughts. Not only the ethical and practical concern, but also how to define, how to put a real name to the problem we are facing. And I hope in the next session we'll discuss how to find opportunities, not only to track the problem, but to help them mitigate its consequences, and not to gain such important enemies as Professor Ernst has gained. So as I imagine everyone has a lot to contribute to this topic, I invite you to the next session, to enrich the next session with your ideas. We'll be working in 5 groups. Each panelist will be a group leader. Will be more or less 40 minutes, and you expect everyone to come with new ideas for the final session. In the groups, I expect the people to share their concern, but especially to keep time to focus in potential solutions. Now we are headed with the other one. No, I don't know, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Roxana, for your terrific chairing of that session, which was fascinating. The comments in the chat were extremely interesting, and we're going to relay all of those to the panelists so they can have those thoughts shared with all of them. So thank you so much for attending this public session. As Roxana mentioned, the conference participants are going to move over to our group there. And our next public session is tomorrow at 6 o'clock a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.